"12 years ago, on a hot, sticky August night, I began to learn the difference between duty and inspiration. And it taught me a lot about what we need to do today. I was mayor of Minneapolis back then on that day in August when the I-35W bridge collapsed. And on that day, 13 people died and hundreds were injured. And yet it would have been a lot worse if not for the incredible heroism that we saw from Minnesotans. They dove into the water to save people from drowning. They walked out into the bridge and risked their own lives because there were school kids on a bus that was precariously perched on the edge of that bridge. I will never forget the looks in the eyes of the family that expected their mom and their wife home for dinner, now coming to terms with the fact that she was dead. And yet somehow they set that aside and turned to the table next to them and helped a man who was coming to terms with his own brother who was dead. Minnesotans did not run from danger. Minnesotans ran to help because it was their duty. It was an incredible thing that happened, but then we set out to do something that was an even bolder vision. We decided that we would build a bridge in 1 year's time. That may not sound like a lot, but anybody who knows anything about it knows it would take at a minimum 3 years if you could possibly get everyone working together. But we did that. We got all those overlapping bureaucracies, the scores of people who have something to say about the Mississippi River, the architects, the engineers, the community groups, and get this, we got Republicans and Democrats, including the governor and including me, to somehow find a way to be on the same side. And we built that bridge in 1 year's time. It taught me that it was important, that it was our duty, but more that we had a vision, an inspiring vision, where we looked up and saw a vision together that said we could somehow create common ground when the common ground had shook. And I don't tell you now because I want to relive the trauma of that day. No one does. But I tell you because of the lesson I learned that duty is important, but inspiration is even more powerful. And it's more powerful when you apply it to the two biggest issues that we face in this community today. The first of those is the unacceptable achievement gap in our schools that shows that the outcomes for kids in our schools are dramatically different along racial lines. And the second issue is the fact that we face a looming worker shortage that threatens to grind our economy to a halt. Now, I believe it is absolutely our duty to make sure that this community is no longer a place where you can predict the likelihood of a child's success by looking at the color of their skin. And I believe it is also our duty to ensure that we're not mortgaging our kids' future because we didn't do what we had to do to plan an economy for the future. That is our duty, but the powerful point is that behind both of those issues, the further you dig, the more you realize they're the same issue, and there's an inspirational vision that can help us solve them both. And here's what I mean. The worker shortage that we have is 100% about race. Now, back in the 1990s, we were producing about 54,000 new workers a day as the baby boom was just coming into the middle of the workforce. By the 2000s, we were down to 34,000 a year. Between 2015 and 2025, we will be producing only 6,000 workers a year. Now let's bring race into that equation. If you didn't include people of color in that, we would already be at negative growth. 100% of the employment growth that we will have is people of color, which also means that the very people we are depending on to make this economy go are also the very people who are being failed by our schools. It is 100% about trying to solve the issues together. So you ask yourself, if this is the biggest issue we face, why aren't we talking about this every single day? Why aren't we putting the money toward it that we need to? And probably even more important, why are we not willing to disrupt the systems that are failing too many of our kids. Well, this isn't a new issue to me. I've spent a lot of time on this as a mayor, now as at the Minneapolis Foundation, and especially in between those two jobs when I led Generation Next, which was a coalition of public-private partners in this community focused especially on closing this achievement gap. And I can tell you from that there are so many people doing incredible work out there with their hearts. But I did come to a conclusion that was pretty unsettling. I recognize that one of the reasons why we're not doing all that we need to every day, every one of us, is because I honestly don't believe we can solve this problem. I believe we need to manage it, but people don't see that we can actually win. And I believe the reason for that is because people keep looking for that one thing that's going to solve this problem. I can't tell you how many times people said to me, give me the one thing it'll take to close the achievement gap. Well, right now, I could give you the one thing it'll take to close the achievement gap. As soon as one of you can give me the one ingredient it takes to bake a cake. The fact of the matter is there is no one big thing. It's a recipe for success. And the good news is the ingredients are starting to be in place. A lot is working. The first ingredient is to start early. Now, I love being in a state like Minnesota, where the largest political debate is not about whether we should invest in early childhood, but about whether we should invest millions in all-day kindergarten or millions in targeted preschool scholarships for kids most in need. You know what's great? The answer is they're both right. You know what's even better? This state has invested millions more in both of them, and we're moving to improve the quality of every kid because we recognize you start early. And that's why it's also so great to have the Northside Achievement Zone in Minneapolis and St. Paul's Promise neighborhood, two of the best examples in this country of what we learned at the Harlem Children's Zone, which said draw a circle around the parts of your community that have the greatest needs, surround those parents right when the kids are born with the supports they need, and carry that right into school. We are succeeding because we start early. We also have to recognize we can't let anyone slip through the cracks. Not only is it wrong, but we can't afford to waste anybody. So let me tell you some interesting research. These brilliant researchers at the University of Chicago said, why are so many kids not graduating? Especially, why are so many kids not graduating? And they looked at a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors in school, out of school, with individual kids, about pregnancy, about racism, about mobility, all sorts of factors. But you know what they found out? The single most important factor for a kid not graduating from high school is, can I get a drum roll, please? They don't have enough credits. Now, that didn't take a rocket science to figure that out, right? Okay? But then these brilliant people asked the next question. How do we count credits? And they recognize the schools really don't have a great system for that, and certainly the kids don't, and certainly the parents don't, and certainly the out-of-school people don't. And what they did in Chicago, we're now doing here. It's called On Track, and it sets up the technology and the partnership. So we're not waiting till that kid wanders into the counselor's office a few hours before graduation and said, I didn't pass the math class in freshman year. We say back when you don't pass the English test in 9th grade, an alert goes off, in school, out of school, parents, teachers, everyone knows, and we get that kid back on track. We cannot let a single kid slip through the cracks. And the next thing we have to do is to make sure we create pathways for success. Now, as adults, we recognize it's hard enough for us to figure out how to plan our career. It's tougher as an adolescent, and it's even tougher for them to figure out how to get the work experience they need to be able to build a resume and get that first step on the ladder. That's why in 2003, we developed Step Up. It's a summer job program. We had the graduation just yesterday. And as of yesterday, over these years, we have now put 28,000 young people into high-quality jobs in almost every great organization in this community. And you know what's even better? 90% of those are kids below the poverty line. 80% are kids of color. 50% are kids from first or second generation immigrant families. We are creating pathways that kids can understand, and they are succeeding. And we also have to never give up on any kid. And that's why I love some of the contract alternative schools in Minneapolis. That's why one of them, Plymouth Christian Youth Center, every graduation, they prove a pretty simple thing that is so profound. They show that a kid who's not succeeding in a traditional school environment may just need another environment. That's why I love Project for Pride Living's new program that helps kids coming out of the criminal justice system get back into the school and graduate. Never give up on anyone. Now, the last point is probably the most important. People are not problems to solve. To address this, I want to make our problem that we're looking at a little bit harder here. We not only need numbers of workers, we need a different kind of worker. And the different kind of worker that we need is the kind that we can send into Best Buy or Target and immediately understand how to relate to their rapidly diversifying customer base. We need the new kind of worker who some of our global companies, 3M, Cargill, Medtronic, name it, who can they send around the world into places where they're not thrown off by the fact that they're not part of the majority culture? Now, where in the world would we find kids like that? Well, we happen to live in Minnesota, which has lived the values of the Statue of Liberty better than almost any community in the country. Wave after wave of great immigration has come here from Southeast Asia, from Africa, from Central America. We have done it the right way. And by doing that, we have a workforce that is a global gold mine. Language skills, cultural skills right here. And it's not just people who've arrived recently in a generation or two. Stop and think about the African-American boy in North Minneapolis who goes from his neighborhood across town to a school in a radically different neighborhood, who goes downtown to their step-up job and back home. That kid can teach us how to code shift. And this isn't just about those kids. Look at me. I'm a 61-and-a-half-year-old white guy who's lived almost his entire life in a place where I'm part of the majority culture. Unless people like me get a radical infusion of global fluency, we will become dinosaurs. Now, I went to Japan for the first time. And when I went to Japan, I wrote my wife this really strange email. I said, you know, I've been with people all week, but I've never felt so lonely. And I couldn't figure out what the deal was until after a while I unpacked it and I recognized that I had never done business. I had never been in a situation where I needed to be recognized as peers with people across the table in a place where I wasn't part of the majority culture. Who could teach me to do that? The kid who came from a refugee camp in Kenya, that kid crossing town from place to place, from culture to culture. That is the most important piece that we have. Now, I want to finish this by telling you a little story about somebody teaching math in Los Angeles, okay? So she's teaching math, and she's trying to teach kids negative numbers. Now, think about this as a teacher. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 0. How do you explain negative numbers, right? Well, they couldn't get it in Los Angeles, so she did what every smart person does. She moves back to Minnesota, and she's here in Minnesota, and she's teaching these kids negative numbers, and all of a sudden, they're getting it just like that. Now, why would a kid in Minnesota understand negative numbers? January? The moment they hear below 0, they get negative numbers, okay? So stop and think about this. A unique population in a unique experience learn something we can all share. Those kids in Minnesota can teach those kids negative numbers, or bring them to here in January, they'll get it. The fact of the matter is, what we have is the ability to have a new generation whose experiences make us all better. Beyond duty, the cleanest thing that anyone can teach you in any math problem is 1 + 1 = 3. And the most important thing that we know is the most powerful, simple message. We make each other better. Thank you.